On the 15th of March 2019, a Reddit user made a thread in the RBI subreddit, which stands for Reddit Bureau of Investigation, asking for help identifying a series of photographs they discovered on an old SD card. The user went on to state that they had recently purchased a lot of vintage cameras at an estate sale in rural Vermont, and while testing one of the cameras, they found an SD card that had been left inside. The photos on the card would lead to one of the most disturbing mysteries in Reddit's history. Let me tell you about 4 Reddit posts that went from strange to absolutely terrifying once the full backstory was revealed. Story 1. The estate sale camera. The original poster, going by the username VintageCollector88, explained that they were an amateur photographer and often bought old cameras from estate sales to restore and collect. This particular camera was a mid-2000s digital camera, nothing special, but it was in good condition. When they inserted the SD card into their computer to format it, they noticed it contained 47 photographs. At first glance, the photos appeared to be typical family snapshots. Birthday parties, holiday gatherings, children playing in a backyard. Normal, mundane images. But as the user scrolled through them chronologically, they noticed something disturbing. In the background of the photos, barely visible, was always the same figure. A person standing in doorways, peering through windows, lurking at the edges of the frame. The figure was always slightly out of focus, always partially obscured but unmistakably present. The user posted several of these photos to the RBI subreddit, asking if anyone could identify what they were seeing. Within hours, the thread exploded with responses. Other users confirmed what the original poster suspected. There was definitely someone in the background of these family photos who shouldn't have been there. What made the situation even more disturbing was the progression. In the earlier photos, the figure was far away, standing in the tree line of the backyard, barely visible through a window reflection. But as the photos progressed chronologically, the figure got closer. In the final photos, taken what appeared to be during a child's birthday party, the figure was standing directly in the doorway of the house, clearly visible, staring directly at whoever was taking the photo. One Reddit user with photography experience noted that based on the timestamps embedded in the photo files, all 47 images were taken over a span of just 3 months, September through November 2007. Another user suggested running the photos through facial recognition software to see if the figure could be identified. The original poster did exactly that, and what they found was chilling. The figure appeared to be the same person in every single photo. A male, approximately 40 to 50 years old, wearing dark clothing. At this point, other Reddit users began suggesting that the original poster should contact police. This wasn't just a mystery, it was evidence of stalking, possibly worse. The user agreed and reached out to the Vermont State Police, providing them with the SD card and the information about the estate sale where they'd purchased the camera. This is where the story takes a dark turn. The police were able to trace the camera back to the estate sale, which had been held after the death of an elderly woman named Margaret Winters. Margaret had lived alone in a rural farmhouse for the last 15 years of her life, following the death of her husband. The photos on the SD card, however, did not belong to Margaret. Based on the content of the images and some visible details in the backgrounds, including a calendar visible in one photo showing September 2007, police determined the camera had likely been taken from another location. Investigators began looking into missing persons cases and unsolved crimes in Vermont from 2007. What they discovered was horrifying. In December 2007, a family of 4, parents and 2 young children, had disappeared from their home in a small Vermont town about 30 miles from where Margaret Winters lived. The family's car was found abandoned at a rest stop near the Canadian border, but no other trace of them was ever found. The case went cold. When investigators compared the photos from the SD card to photos of the missing family's home, which had been documented during the original investigation, they matched. The backyard, the interior layout visible through windows, even the children's faces, it was the same family. The figure in the background of the photos had been stalking this family for 3 months before they disappeared. But here's where it gets even darker. When police searched Margaret Winters' property more thoroughly, they discovered something in a storage shed behind her house. A collection of personal items that had belonged to the missing family. Clothing, toys, photographs, and the camera. Margaret Winters had died of natural causes in 2018, more than a decade after the family disappeared. But the evidence suggested she'd been storing these items for years. The question became, was Margaret involved in the disappearance? Or had someone else, possibly the figure in the photos, used her property without her knowledge? Police investigated Margaret's background. She'd been a reclusive woman, rarely leaving her property. Neighbors described her as odd but harmless. She had no criminal record. But here's the detail that makes this story even more unsettling. Margaret had a son. A son who had lived with her on and off throughout his adult life. A son who matched the general description of the figure in the photographs. His name was Thomas Winters. He was 52 years old at the time of his mother's death. And when police tried to locate him, they discovered he'd left Vermont shortly after his mother's funeral. His current whereabouts were unknown. Investigators obtained a photograph of Thomas Winters from his driver's license records. When they compared it to enhanced images of the figure from the SD card photos, the resemblance was undeniable. A warrant was issued for Thomas Winters' arrest on suspicion of kidnapping and murder. But as of today, he has never been found. The case remains open. The original Reddit poster, Vintage Collector 88, later deleted their account. But the photos they shared sparked a renewed investigation into a cold case that had been forgotten for over a decade. The family, the Hendersons, father Mark, mother Sarah, daughter Emma age 7, and son Lucas, age 5, are still listed as missing. Their bodies have never been recovered. And somewhere, Thomas Winters is still out there, possibly with answers about what happened during those 3 months he spent watching that family, and what happened after the photos stopped. Story 2, the apartment building livestream. On September 8, 2021, a Reddit user posted in the cybersecurity subreddit with a question that initially seemed innocuous but would reveal something deeply disturbing. The user, going by the name TechCCGuy, stated that while conducting a routine security audit for a small tech company in Seattle, Washington, he had discovered an unusual IP address on the company's network that didn't belong to any authorized device. The user explained that as part of his job, he regularly scanned networks for unauthorized access points, vulnerabilities, and potential security threats. During one such scan, he identified an IP address that was consuming a significant amount of bandwidth, approximately 2 to 3 gigabytes per hour, consistently 24/7. This was unusual. Most unauthorized devices on a network are either dormant, waiting to be activated for malicious purposes, or consume minimal bandwidth. This device was actively transmitting large amounts of data continuously. Using network analysis tools, the user traced the IP address to a device somewhere in the building. The problem was the building housed not just the tech company, but also 30 residential apartments on the floors above. The user posted asking for advice. Should he report this to building management? Should he try to identify the specific apartment? Was this even something he should be concerned about? The responses he received were unanimous. Investigate further, but carefully. Over the next week, the user provided updates in the form of edited posts. Using a combination of wireless signal strength triangulation and building blueprints he obtained from the management office, he narrowed down the device's location to one of 3 apartments on the 4th floor. But here's where it gets strange. When he checked the building's resident directory, all 3 of those apartments were listed as vacant. They were undergoing renovation and weren't supposed to have any occupants or active internet connections. The user decided to contact building management discreetly. He explained that there appeared to be an unauthorized device consuming bandwidth in one of the vacant units. The building manager was skeptical but agreed to let him accompany a maintenance worker to check the apartments. What they found was horrifying. In apartment 4B, completely empty except for renovation supplies, there was a small closet near the water heater. Inside that closet, carefully hidden behind a false panel, was a sophisticated setup. For laptops, a router, several external hard drives, and multiple wireless cameras. The laptops were running 24/7, streaming and recording. But streaming what? The user and the maintenance worker initially thought they'd discovered some kind of cryptocurrency mining operation, which would explain the high bandwidth usage. But when they examined one of the laptop screens, they realized it was much worse. The cameras were positioned in multiple units throughout the building. Bedrooms, bathrooms, living rooms. The live streams showed real-time footage of residents in their apartments, completely unaware they were being watched. The user immediately called 911. Police arrived within 20 minutes and seized all the equipment. The subsequent investigation revealed the full scope of what was happening. The person responsible had been a maintenance worker at the building for 3 years. His name was David Chin, age 34. He had legitimate access to all apartments for repairs and inspections. Over those 3 years, he'd been installing hidden cameras in apartments throughout the building. Small, wireless cameras disguised as smoke detectors, air fresheners, power outlets. Residents had no idea they were being recorded. The setup in apartment 4B was his control center. He would access the vacant apartment after hours, using his maintenance key, to manage the recordings and upload content. Upload content where? That's the disturbing part. Police discovered that David Chin had been selling the footage online. Videos of people in their private moments, changing clothes, showering, sleeping, engaging in intimate activities, were being sold on the dark web. When police raided Chen's personal residence, they found years' worth of archived footage. Hundreds of hours. Dozens of victims. He was arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including voyeurism, unlawful surveillance, distribution of intimate images, and computer crimes. But here's the detail that makes this story even more unsettling. During the investigation, police discovered that Chen had a network of buyers. Regular customers who would request specific content. More footage of the woman in 5C. Do you have anything from the couple in 2A's bedroom? This wasn't just opportunistic voyeurism. It was targeted, systematic, and had been operating as a business for years. The building management company faced multiple lawsuits. Residents who'd lived there during Chen's employment had to reckon with the possibility that they'd been filmed without their knowledge. Many moved out immediately. The original Reddit poster, TechSEC Guy, was credited by police for uncovering the operation. His routine security audit had accidentally revealed a crime that might have continued indefinitely if not for his diligence. Chin pleaded guilty to avoid trial and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. But the psychological damage to the victims, many of whom still don't know the full extent of what was captured on camera, is immeasurable. The user's final update on Reddit was brief. Changed careers. Don't do security audits anymore. Some things you can't unsee. Story 3. The Storage Unit Auction Find. In November 2020, a Reddit user posted in the What Is This Thing subreddit with a question that would lead to one of the most disturbing discoveries in the platform's history. The user, going by FlipperPro, explained that they made their living buying abandoned storage units at auction, sorting through the contents and reselling anything valuable. For those unfamiliar, when someone stops paying rent on a storage unit for an extended period, the storage facility eventually auctions off the contents to recoup their losses. It's a gamble. Sometimes you get valuable antiques or collectibles, sometimes you get trash. FlipperPro had just purchased a unit at an auction in rural Pennsylvania. The unit had been abandoned for 2 years, unpaid rent accumulating. At the auction, bidders could only look into the unit from the doorway, no touching, no detailed inspection. FlipperPro saw what looked like furniture, boxes, and some electronics. They bid $350 and won. When they opened the unit to begin sorting, they found the usual items. Old furniture, clothes, kitchen supplies, boxes of books. But in the back corner, underneath a tarp, they found something unusual. A locked filing cabinet. Using bolt cutters to open it, they discovered it was filled with documents. Medical records. Legal paperwork. And photographs. Hundreds of photographs. The photographs were disturbing. They showed various people, men, women, children, in what appeared to be medical or therapeutic settings. But something was wrong with the images. The people looked distressed, restrained. Some showed visible injuries. The user posted several of the less graphic photos with faces redacted, asking if anyone could help identify what they'd found. Was this from a legitimate medical facility? A research project? Something else? Within hours, Reddit users began identifying elements in the photos. One user recognized the style of furniture and equipment as being from the 1980s or early 1990s. Another user with a background in medical history pointed out that some of the restraints shown in the photos had been banned from use in mental health facilities decades ago due to ethical concerns. But the comment that changed everything came from a user who claimed to be a retired social worker. They stated that they recognized the setting of the photos. Not specifically, but the type. This looked like documentation from an unlicensed facility, the kind of place that operated on the fringes of legality, offering treatment for troubled children and teenagers that involved methods that would never be approved by any legitimate medical board. These facilities, sometimes called troubled teen programs or behavioral modification camps, operated throughout the 1980s and 1990s, often in remote areas where oversight was minimal. Many have since been shut down following investigations into abuse, but some records were never properly preserved or turned over to authorities. The user, FlipperPro, took this information seriously and contacted the Pennsylvania State Police. They turned over all the contents of the filing cabinet. The investigation that followed was extensive. Police identified the facility in the photographs as a now-defunct program called New Horizons Youth Center, which operated from 1987 to 1996 in rural Pennsylvania before closing following allegations of abuse that never resulted in charges due to lack of evidence. The documents in the filing cabinet were medical records, intake forms, and progress reports for over 200 children who had been sent to the facility by their parents, many under court order. But it was the photographs that provided the evidence that had been missing decades ago. The images clearly showed abuse, physical restraint beyond what would be medically necessary, children in isolation cells, visible injuries, conditions that violated every standard of care for minors in a therapeutic setting. Police began the painstaking process of identifying the individuals in the photographs and tracking down now adult survivors. Many of them had tried for years to bring attention to what had happened at New Horizons, but without evidence, their stories had been dismissed. The filing cabinet, which had been stored in a unit rented by a former staff member who'd kept the records for reasons unknown, provided that evidence. Criminal charges couldn't be filed. The statute of limitations had long expired, and the facility's director, a man named Richard Brennan, had died in 2003. But the discovery did lead to civil litigation. Multiple survivors came forward and filed a class action lawsuit against the estate of Richard Brennan and against some surviving former staff members. The case settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. But more importantly, it provided validation for survivors who'd been told for decades that they were lying or exaggerating their experiences. The user, Flipper Pro, posted one final update. They stated they'd stopped doing storage unit auctions. The experience had been too disturbing. They'd thought they were just buying abandoned junk, but instead they'd uncovered evidence of decades-old crimes. They ended their post with a haunting question. How many other storage units out there contain similar secrets? How many pieces of evidence of crimes are just sitting in abandoned units, waiting to be discovered or destroyed? Story 4. The Craigslist Roommate Ad. In July 2022, a Reddit user posted in the Creepy Encounters subreddit with a story that would get increasingly disturbing as more details emerged. The user, going by Roommate Survivor, explained that they were a 24-year-old graduate student looking for affordable housing in Austin, Texas. Like many young people in expensive cities, they turned to Craigslist to find roommate situations. They found an ad that seemed perfect. Private bedroom and bathroom in a nice house, utilities included, $600 per month, and the poster emphasized they were easygoing and rarely home. The user reached out, exchanged a few emails with the person, a man named Marcus, and arranged to see the room. The house was indeed nice. Clean, well-furnished, in a safe neighborhood. Marcus seemed normal. Friendly but not overly so. Professional. He worked in tech, he said, which explained why he could afford the house and why he was rarely home. Lots of travel for work. The user moved in at the beginning of August. For the first 2 weeks, everything was fine. They barely saw Marcus. He'd leave early in the morning, come home late, or wouldn't be there at all for days at a time. Then the user started noticing small things. Items in their room would be slightly moved. A book they'd left on their nightstand would be on their desk. Their laptop would be angled differently. They chalked it up to themselves being forgetful. But then they noticed something that couldn't be explained away. They had a habit of placing a strand of hair across their door before leaving their room. An old trick they'd learned from a friend who was paranoid about privacy. If the hair was disturbed, it meant someone had opened the door. The hair kept being disturbed. Every time they left the house, they'd come back to find the hair gone, meaning someone had entered their room while they were away. The user confronted Marcus about it. Marcus denied it completely, seemed offended they would even suggest it. But the incidents continued. The user decided to set up a hidden camera in their room. Nothing expensive or sophisticated, just an old phone positioned on a bookshelf, set to record while they were at class. What the footage revealed was disturbing. Marcus was entering the room regularly while the user was away. He would sit at their desk, go through their belongings, read their journal, look through their laptop files. The user hadn't password protected it, and even lie down on their bed. The user posted this story on Reddit asking for advice. Should they confront Marcus again with the evidence? Should they just move out? Should they call the police? The responses overwhelmingly advised calling the police. This wasn't just a privacy violation, it was potentially criminal trespass, and the behavior was alarming. Before the user could act, something happened that escalated everything. They came home from class one afternoon to find Marcus in their room. He wasn't hiding. He was sitting on their bed, holding their laptop, scrolling through their photos. The user froze in the doorway. Marcus looked up, completely calm, and said, "I need to make sure you're safe. There are dangerous people out there." The user backed out of the room, ran downstairs, and left the house. They called 911 from their car. When police arrived and entered the house with the user, they found Marcus in the living room, acting confused about why police were there. He claimed he'd never entered the user's room, that the user was paranoid and possibly unstable. The user showed police the video footage on their phone. Marcus's demeanor changed immediately. He became agitated, claiming the user had violated his privacy by recording in his house. Police asked Marcus for identification to fill out a report. What they found when they ran his ID was concerning. There was a warrant for his arrest in another state, Colorado, for stalking. Marcus was arrested on the spot. The stalking charge from Colorado involved a similar situation. A woman who'd briefly dated Marcus and then ended things, after which he'd broken into her apartment multiple times, left disturbing notes, and eventually violated a restraining order. But here's where this story gets truly disturbing. When police searched the house with a warrant obtained based on the stalking charge, they found cameras. Multiple cameras. Hidden throughout the house, including several in the user's bedroom and bathroom. Marcus had been recording everything. Every moment the user had spent in the house, thinking they had privacy, they'd been filmed. Police found hundreds of hours of footage stored on hard drives in Marcus's bedroom. The user doing homework, sleeping, changing clothes, everything. But it wasn't just footage of the current roommate. There were recordings of previous roommates. Multiple people going back at least 3 years. Police began the process of identifying and contacting victims. Marcus was charged with multiple felonies, including unlawful surveillance, stalking, and violating the terms of his probation from the Colorado case. He'd moved to Texas without notifying his probation officer, which was a violation. The investigation revealed that Marcus had been running the same scam for years. He'd post roommate ads on Craigslist, select victims who seemed vulnerable or isolated, and then surveil them obsessively. He'd collected information about their routines, their friends, their passwords, their lives. What his endgame was, police couldn't determine. Was he planning to escalate to physical violence? Was he just a voyeur? The disturbing reality is that he might have continued indefinitely if the user hadn't thought to set up their own camera. The user's final update on Reddit was posted from a new account. They stated they'd moved back in with their parents in another state, were in therapy, and had changed their name and appearance due to paranoia about being identified or found. They ended with a warning: always trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, it probably is. And never, ever live with someone you found on Craigslist without doing a thorough background check. Marcus pleaded guilty to avoid trial and was sentenced to 12 years in prison. But the psychological damage to his victims, people who thought they'd found a safe, affordable place to live, is something they'll carry forever. These 4 stories share a common thread. They started as innocent questions or discoveries posted on Reddit by ordinary people. But they uncovered crimes, solved cold cases, or revealed ongoing victimization that might have continued indefinitely if not for someone paying attention to the details that seemed wrong. The internet, particularly places like Reddit, can be a force for good in this way. Crowdsourcing investigations, sharing knowledge, connecting dots that isolated individuals couldn't connect alone. But these stories also serve as a reminder: the world contains people who do terrible things. And sometimes, the evidence of those terrible things is hidden in plain sight, on an SD card, in a camera, in network traffic, in an abandoned storage unit, or in the room next door. Stay vigilant. Trust your instincts. And never stop asking questions when something doesn't seem right.